The legendary Pokemon Kyurem is returning to Pokemon GO's raid battles, and in this video, I'm going to be going over the best counters and strategies for taking on this raid boss and giving you the reasons why this Pokemon still matters. Hey, what's happening everyone? Jinsula here with a brand new Pokemon GO video. I hope your day is going really well, and let's get right into it. So, Kyurem is a very interesting Pokemon because in and of itself, it's not necessarily a very powerful one. There are some people out there who will say Kyurem is a very solid raid attacker, but I wholeheartedly disagree with that. There are definitely better options when it comes to dragon types and ice types, but Kyurem is still a highly valuable Pokemon because it has two fusion forms, which are considered some of the best Pokemon in the game. Both White Kyurem and Black Kyurem are basically the strongest ice types currently in Pokemon GO, and in order to get those, you need to have yourself a Kyurem. Kyurem is basically the foundational Pokemon for both of those not Mega Evolutions, fusion forms, and you will need to have yourself perfect IVs of Kyurem in order to get the best of the best versions of those fusions. So a lot of players do tend to raid for Kyurem whenever it is in raid battles, simply because they are hoping for that Shundo that they could use for a fusion in the future. However, there are also players out there who do not raid Kyurem, simply because it's going to be a lot more efficient to just raid Black Kyurem and White Kyurem raids because you're going to get Kyurem encounters anyway, and you'll get the fusion energy along the way. So I totally understand that sentiment, and when it comes to just regular Kyurem, it may seem like a waste of raid passes. However, I always tend to disagree with that. Even if you're not going to be getting fusion energy, there is still a chance you could get yourself 100% IVs of this Pokemon, and that is definitely going to be a candidate for a fusion form in the future. So even though you're not getting fusion energy, you should probably still raid Kyurem. It'll definitely help you out. So let's go over how you could take it down. If you're looking for the best counters and the right strategies, here is what you should use. Kyurem is a dragon and ice type legendary Pokemon, which is actually kind of a unique type combination. Very few Pokemon have these typings, so when it comes to Kyurem, there are very specific counters. In terms of weaknesses, Kyurem is weak against Dragon, Fighting, Fairy, Rock, and Steel type attacks, and it's going to be resistant against Grass, Water, and Electric type attacks. When it comes to the weaknesses, yes, it does have a few options, but there are very specific Pokemon you will want to use that are going to deal the most damage per second, and we'll get into those later. When it comes to perfect IVs, Kyurem is definitely one of those Pokemon where you do want to get perfect IVs. You're going to want to look for one that is 2042, and if it's weather boosted, 2553 is going to be the magic number. And speaking of weather boosts, Kyurem is going to be weather boosted by windy weather and snowy weather, both of which are pretty rare weather types. So yeah, if you do happen to have these weathers, it might be worth going out and raiding for them so you can get a weather boost. And something to keep in mind regarding the best counters for Kyurem, these weather boosts also boost up the damage of those counters. Now if you want to secure the win up against Kyurem, you're going to want to have a raid group that consists of 5 trainers with great counters, and you can duo Kyurem, but you will need the absolute best counters and all the advantages that you typically would bring, like party power, best buddy bonuses, things like that. And when it comes to those best counters, let's go over them right now. The Mega Evolution you will want to use is going to be Mega Lucario. That is by far the best Mega Evolution up against this raid boss, but also Crown Sword Zacian and Crown Shield Zamazenta with Fairy type attacks, Fighting type attacks, or Steel type attacks. They're all going to be really solid up against Kyurem. And rounding out with them, you also have Duskmane Necrozma with Steel type attacks. That's also going to be really good. And then Resolute Form Keldeo with Fighting type attacks is also going to be a top DPS Pokemon. And actually, if you do have a Resolute Form Keldeo and it's powered up, it might be worth bringing up against this raid boss because chances are other players will be using Mega Lucario and you could boost up the damage. And speaking of Lucario, it is actually a pretty solid budget counter, where if you do not have any legendaries in your collection, you should definitely bring at least regular Lucario because it'll deal a lot of damage. And of course, Metagross is a solid pick because of its Steel type attacks. That is definitely a great choice if you do not have legendaries. Basically speaking, go with Fighting types or Steel types because when it comes to the amount of Pokemon that have been released up until now, those are the highest DPS Pokemon in the game, especially when it comes to Steel types. So yeah, when it comes to taking down Kyurem, it's not necessarily fully straightforward. You do have a lot of options that you could use, but it's going to be very different from what you would typically bring up against a dragon type or an ice type. Like if you try to bring fire types for ice type raid bosses, those are not necessarily going to work. If you're bringing dragon types up against dragon type raid bosses, those are also not necessarily going to work. You're just going to want to go with the counters that I mentioned, and you'll be good to go. Now, as I mentioned before, Kyurem is definitely a raid boss that is actually worth raiding, at least with your free daily raid pass. Again, if you're lucky enough to get yourself a Shundo of this Pokemon, it is definitely worth powering up, and you will definitely want to fuse it with either, Reshiram or Zekrom in the future. You can't go wrong with either of those fusions, but yeah, it's good to have like a Shundo on hand. And of course, if you have a bunch of shinies of this Pokemon, you could use those for trades. I think a lot of people are always asking for shiny Kyurem when it comes to lucky trades and things like that. That's also something you should keep in mind. Shiny Kyurem is a highly valuable legendary Pokemon that people ask for in trades. So if you want to have some decent Pokemon for that really awesome shiny that you are looking for, then having a shiny Kyurem might actually benefit you. You definitely want to stock up on these. They're very nice, and yeah, maybe you won't get some immediate use out of Kyurem itself, but at the very least, it's one of those like you're investing, you know? Like you're investing into a future very powerful Pokemon, so because of that, it still might be worth raiding a couple of these. That's just my own personal opinion. Now, when it comes to Kyurem itself, like I mentioned, it's not going to be useful, unfortunately. Some people will use it for raid battles until they get better ice types or dragon types. You could do that. It's not an overly useless Pokemon. It's still going to deal some damage on its own, but it's really about the fusion forms. Kyurem is not necessarily a powerful Pokemon, and it really just comes down to the fusions. And I think because of that, players always tend to forget about this Pokemon. But it's still pretty good. It's not terrible, but it's not great. That's the best way to describe regular Kyurem. It's just a Pokemon that exists, and it's basically like an ingredient Pokemon. It's kind of sad to say. A lot of people see Pokemon like Kyurem or Necrozma, or even like the hero of many battles forms of Zacian and Zamazenta. They just kind of see them as like, they're not going to be useful unless you're using them for a fusion. And I think that's kind of sad, because some of these Pokemon can be very powerful in a world where certain Pokemon don't exist. But because the game has been power crept for so long, like there are certain Pokemon out there that are just extremely OP and they're just at a completely different tier, a lot of regular legendaries kind of fall by the wayside, and unfortunately Kyurem is exactly that. I think at one point it was actually considered a pretty decent ice type, but nowadays it's not. It's not a Pokemon you would really think about powering up. It just kind of exists, and yeah, but it is what it is. Like, you're going to be basically farming up Kyurem for a future Pokemon, a fusion form of Kyurem. That's basically what the whole point of these raids are. But again, some people will say, probably want to save your raid passes, because White Kyurem and Black Kyurem raids are going to be a lot more efficient. And that totally makes sense. So you can decide. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know your thoughts regarding Kyurem. Is this a raid boss that you actually raid for? Are you going for the shiny version of Kyurem? Or are you going to be skipping this out and saving your raid passes for a future raid boss? Definitely share all those thoughts in the comments below, and let's have a great discussion. And if you enjoyed this video, found it to be informative, and you want to support my channel, best way you could do that is hitting the like button for this video. And if you're watching this video on mobile, make sure you hype this video as well, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and turn on the notification bell so you know exactly when I upload videos. Also, take a second and check out the links in the description below. One of them is my Patreon page, and if you join my Patreon, you get a spot on my Pokemon Go friends list. So if you want to play Pokemon Go with me, make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And that's going to be it for this video. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself today, and I'll catch you in the next video.